Ender came and found that in the game he had become a child, though usually his figure in the games was adult. In fact, he was smaller than the other children. He got in line for the slide. The other children ignored him. He climbed up to the top, watched the boy before him whirl down the long spiral to the ground. Then he sat and began to slide. He had not slid for a moment when he fell right through the slide and landed on the ground under the ladder. The slide would not hold him. Neither would the monkey bars. He could climb a ways, but then, at random, a bar seemed to be insubstantial, and he fell. He could sit on the seesaw until he rose to the apex, then he fell. When the merry-go-round went fast, he could not hold on to any of the bars, and centrifugal force hurled him off. And the other children, their laughter was raucous, offensive. They circled around him and pointed and laughed for many seconds before they went back to their play. Ender wanted to hit them, to throw them in the brook. Instead, he walked into the forest. He found a path which soon became an ancient brick road, much overgrown with weeds but still usable. There were hints of possible games off to either side, but Ender followed none of them. He wanted to see where the path led. It led to a clearing, with a well in the middle and a sign that said, "Drink, Traveler." Ender went forward and looked at the well. Almost at once he heard a snarl. Out of the woods emerged a dozen slavering wolves with human faces. Ender recognized them. They were the children from the playground, only now their teeth could tear. Ender, weaponless, was quickly devoured. His next figure appeared as usual in the same spot and was eaten again, though Ender tried to climb down into the well. The next appearance, though, was at the playground. Again the children laughed at him. Laugh all you like, Ender thought. I know what you are. He pushed one of them. She followed him, angry. Ender led her up the slide. Of course, he fell through, but this time, following so closely behind him, she also fell through. When she hit the ground, she turned into a wolf and lay there, dead or stunned. One by one, Ender led each of the others into a trap, but before he had finished off the last of them, the wolves began reviving and were no longer children. Ender was torn apart again. This time, shaking and sweating, Ender found his figure revived on the giant's table. I should quit, he told himself. I should go to my new army. But instead he made his figure drop down from the table and walk around the giant's body to the playground. This time, as soon as the child hit the ground and turned into a wolf, Ender dragged the body to the brook and pulled it in. Each time the body sizzled as though the water were acid. The wolf was consumed, and a dark cloud of smoke arose and drifted away. The children were easily dispatched, though they began following him in twos and threes at the end. Ender found no wolves waiting for him in the clearing, and he lowered himself into the well on the bucket rope. The light in the cavern was dim, but he could see piles of jewels. He passed them by, noting that behind him eyes glinted among the gems. A table covered with food did not interest him. He passed through a group of cages hanging from the ceiling of the cave, each containing some exotic, friendly-looking creature. I'll play with you later, Ender thought. At last he came to a door with these words in glowing emeralds, "The end of the world." He did not hesitate. He opened the door and stepped through. He stood on a small ledge high on a cliff overlooking a terrain of bright and deep green forest, with dashes of autumn color and patches here and there of cleared land, with ox-drawn plows and small villages, a castle on a rise in the distance, and clouds riding currents of air below him. Above him, the sky was the ceiling of a vast cavern, with crystals dangling in bright stalactites. The door closed behind him. Ender studied the scene intently. With the beauty of it, he cared less for survival than usual. He cared little at the moment what the game of this place might be. He had found it, and seeing it was its own reward, and so, with no thought of consequences, he jumped from the ledge. Now he plummeted downward, toward a roiling river and savage rocks. But a cloud came between him and the ground as he fell, and caught him, and carried him away. It took him to the tower of the castle and through the open window bearing him in. There it left him in a room with no apparent door in floor or ceiling, and windows looking out over a certainly fatal fall. A moment ago he had thrown himself from a ledge carelessly. This time he hesitated. The small rug before the fire unraveled itself into a long, slender serpent with wicked teeth. "I am your only escape," it said. "Death is your only escape." Ender looked around the room for a weapon, when suddenly the screen went dark. Words flashed around the rim of the desk. "Report to Commander immediately. You are late. Green, green, brown." Furious, Ender snapped off the desk and went to the color wall, where he found the ribbon of green, green, brown, touched it, and followed it as it lit up before him. The dark green, light green, and brown of the ribbon reminded him of the early autumn kingdom he had found in the game. "I must go back there," he told himself. "The serpent is a long thread. I can let myself down from the tower and find my way through that place. Perhaps it's called the end of the world because it's the end of the games, because I can go to one of the villages and become one of the little boys working and playing there, with nothing to kill, and nothing to kill me, just living there." As he thought of it, though, he could not imagine what just living might actually be. He had never done it in his life, but he wanted to do it anyway. Armies were larger than launch groups, and the army barracks room was larger too. It was long and narrow, with bunks on both sides, so long, in fact, that you could see the curvature of the floor as the far end bent upward, part of the wheel of the battle school. Ender stood at the door. A few boys near the door glanced at him, but they were older, and it seemed as though they hadn't even seen him. They went on with their conversations, lying and leaning on bunks. They were discussing battles, of course. The older boys always did. They were all much larger than Ender. The 10- and 11-year-olds towered over him. Even the youngest were 8, and Ender was not large for his age. He tried to see which of the boys was the commander, but most wore somewhere between battle dress and what the soldiers always called their sleep uniform, skin from head to toe. Many of them had desks out, but few were studying. Ender stepped into the room. The moment he did, he was noticed. "What do you want?" demanded the boy who had the upper bunk by the door. He was the largest of them. Ender had noticed him before, a young giant who had whiskers growing raggedly on his chin. "You're not a salamander." "I'm supposed to be, I think," Ender said. "Green, green, brown, right? I was transferred." He showed the boy, obviously the door guard, his paper. The door guard reached for it. Ender withdrew it just out of reach. "I'm supposed to give it to Bonzo Madrid." Now another boy joined the conversation. A smaller boy, but still larger than Ender. "Not Bonzo, pisshead, Bonzo. The name's Spanish, Bonzo Madrid. Aquí nosotros hablamos español, señor gran fedor." "You must be Bonzo, then?" Ender asked, pronouncing the name correctly. "No, just a brilliant and talented polyglot, Petra Arkanian. The only girl in Salamander Army, with more balls than anyone else in the room." "Mother Petra, she talkin'," said one of the boys. "She talkin', she talkin'." Another one chimed in, "Shit talkin', shit talkin', shit talkin'." Quite a few laughed. "Just between you and me," Petra said, "if they gave the battle school an enema, they'd stick it in at green, green, brown." Ender despaired. He already had nothing going for him, grossly undertrained, small, inexperienced, doomed to be resented for early advancement, and now, by chance, he had made exactly the wrong friend, an outcast in Salamander Army, and she had just linked him with her in the minds of the rest of the army. Oh, a good day's work. For a moment, as Ender looked around at the laughing, jeering faces, he imagined their bodies covered with hair, their teeth pointed for tearing. Am I the only human being in this place? Are all the others animals waiting only to devour? Then he remembered a lie. In every army, surely, there was at least one worth knowing. Suddenly, though no one said to be quiet, the laughter stopped, and the group fell silent. Ender turned to the door. A boy stood there, tall and slender, with beautiful black eyes and slender lips that hinted at refinement. I would follow such beauty, said something inside Ender. I would see as those eyes see. Who are you? Asked the boy quietly. Ender Wiggin, sir, Ender said. Reassigned from launch to Salamander Army. He held out the orders. The boy took the paper in a swift, sure movement without touching Ender's hand. How old are you, Wiggin? He asked. Almost 7. Still quietly, he said, I asked how old you are, not how old you almost are. I am 6 years, 9 months, and 12 days old. How long have you been working in the battle room? A few months now. My aim is better. Any training in battle maneuvers? Have you ever been part of a toon? Have you ever carried out a joint exercise? Ender had never heard of such things. He shook his head. Madrid looked at him steadily. I see. As you will quickly learn, the officers in command of this school, most notably Major Anderson, who runs the game, are fond of playing tricks. Salamander Army is just beginning to emerge from indecent obscurity. We have won 12 of our last 20 games. We have surprised Rat and Scorpion and Hound, and we are ready to play for leadership in the game. So, of course, I am given such a useless, untrained, hopeless specimen of underdevelopment as yourself. Petra said quietly, He isn't glad to meet you. Shut up, Arcanian, Madrid said. To one trial we now add another. But whatever obstacles our officers choose to fling on our path, we are still Salamander, cried the soldiers in one voice. Instinctively, Ender's perception of these events changed. It was a pattern, a ritual. Madrid was not trying to hurt him, merely taking control of a surprising event and using it to strengthen his control of his army. We are the fire that will consume them, belly and bowel, head and heart, many flames of us, but one fire. Salamander, they cried again. Even this one will not weaken us. For a moment Ender allowed himself to hope. I'll work hard and learn quickly, he said. I didn't give you permission to speak, Madrid answered. I intend to trade you away as quickly as I can. I'll probably have to give up someone valuable along with you, but as small as you are worse than useless. One more, frozen inevitably in every battle, that's all you are. And we're now at a point where every frozen soldier makes a difference in the standings. Nothing personal, Wiggin, but I'm sure you can get her training at someone else's expense. He's all heart, Petra said. Madrid stepped closer to the girl and slapped her across the face with the back of his hand. It made little sound, for only his fingernails had hit her, but there were bright red marks, 4 of them, on her cheek, and little pricks of blood marked where the tips of his fingernails had struck. Here are your instructions, Wiggin. I expect that it is the last time I'll need to speak to you. You will stay out of the way when we're training in the battle room. You have to be there, of course, but you will not belong to any toon, and you will not take part in any maneuvers. When we are called to battle, you will dress quickly and present yourself at the gate with everyone else, but you will not pass through the gate until 4 full minutes after the beginning of the game, and then you will remain at the gate with your weapons undrawn and unfired until such time as the game ends. Ender nodded. So he was to be a nothing. He hoped the trade happened soon. He also noticed that Petra did not so much as cry out in pain or touch her cheek, though one spot of blood had beaded and run, making a streak down to her jaw. Outcast she may be, but since Bonzo Madrid was not going to be Ender's friend, no matter what, he might as well make friends with Petra. He was assigned a bunk at the far end of the room, the upper bunk, so that when he lay on his bed he couldn't even see the door. The curve of the ceiling blocked it. There were other boys near him, tired-looking boys, sullen, the ones least valued. They had nothing of welcome to say to Ender. Ender tried to palm his locker open, but nothing happened. Then he realized the lockers were not secured. All 4 of them had rings on them to pull them open. Nothing would be private then, now that he was in an army. There was a uniform in the locker, not the pale green of the launchies, but the orange-trimmed dark green of Salamander Army. It did not fit well, but then they had probably never had to provide such a uniform for a boy so young. He was starting to take it off when he noticed Petra walking down the aisle toward his bed. He slid off the bunk and stood on the floor to greet her. "Relax," she said. "I'm not an officer." "You're a toon leader, aren't you?" Someone nearby snickered. "Whatever gave you that idea, Wiggin?" "You have a bunk in the front." I bunk in the front because I'm the best sharpshooter in Salamander Army, and because Bonzo is afraid I'll start a revolution if the toon leaders don't keep an eye on me. As if I could start anything with boys like these." She indicated the sullen-faced boys on the nearby bunks. What was she trying to do, make it worse than it already was? "Everybody's better than I am," Ender said, trying to dissociate himself from her contempt for the boys who would, after all, be his near bunkmates. "I'm a girl," she said, "and you're a pissant of a 6-year-old. We have so much in common. Why don't we be friends?" "I won't do your desk work for you," he said. In a moment she realized it was a joke. "Ha," she said. "It's also military when you're in the game. School for us isn't like it is for launchies. History and strategy and tactics and buggers and math and stars, things you'll need as a pilot or a commander. You'll see." "So you're my friend. Do I get a prize?" Ender asked. He was imitating her swaggering way of speaking, as if she cared about nothing. "Bonzo isn't going to let you practice. He's going to make you take your desk to the battle room and study. He's right in a way. He don't want a totally untrained little kid to screw up his precision maneuvers." She lapsed into Giria, the slangy talk that imitated the pidgin English of uneducated people. "Bonzo, he precise. He's so careful. He piss on a plate and never splash." Ender grinned. "The battle room is open all the time. If you want, I'll take you in the off hours and show you some of the things I know. I'm not a great soldier, but I'm pretty good, and I sure know more than you." "If you want," Ender said. "Starting tomorrow morning after breakfast." "What if somebody's using the room? We always went right after breakfast in my launch." "No problem. There are really 9 battle rooms." "I never heard of any others." "They all have the same entrance. The whole center of the battle school, the hub of the wheel, is battle rooms. They don't rotate with the rest of the station. That's how they do the nullo, the no gravity. It just holds still. No spin, no down. But they can set it up so that any one of the rooms is at the battle room entrance corridor that we all use. Once you're inside, they move it along and another battle room's in position." "Oh. Like I said, right after breakfast." "Right," Ender said. She started to walk away. "Petra," he said. She turned back. "Thanks." She said nothing, just turned around again and walked down the aisle. Ender climbed back up on his bunk and finished taking off his uniform. He lay naked on the bed, doodling with his new desk, trying to decide if they had done anything to his access codes. Sure enough, they had wiped out his security system. He couldn't own anything here, not even his desk. The lights dimmed a little, getting toward bedtime. Ender didn't know which bathroom to use. "Go left out of the door," said the boy on the next bunk. "We share it with Rat, Condor, and Squirrel." Ender thanked him and started to walk on past. "Hey," said the boy. "You can't go like that. Uniforms at all times out of this room. Even going to the toilet? Especially. And you're forbidden to speak to anyone from any other army, at meals or in the toilet. You can get away with it sometimes in the game room, and of course whenever a teacher tells you to. But if Bonzo catches you, you dead, eh?" "Thanks. And, Bonzo get mad if you skin by Petra." "She was naked when I came in, wasn't she?" "She do what she like, but you keep you clothes on. Bonzo's orders." That was stupid. Petra still looked like a boy. It was a stupid rule. It set her apart, made her different, split the army. Stupid, stupid. How did Bonzo get to be a commander if he didn't know better than that? A lie would be a better commander than Bonzo. He knew how to bring a group together. I know how to bring a group together too, thought Ender. Maybe I'll be commander someday. In the bathroom, he was washing his hands when somebody spoke to him. "Hey, they putting babies in salamander uniforms now?" Ender didn't answer, just dried off his hands. "Hey, look, Salamander's getting babies now. Look at this. He could walk between my legs without touching my balls." "'Cause you got none, Dink, that's why," somebody answered. As Ender left the room, he heard somebody else say, "It's Wiggin, you know, the smart-ass launchy from the game room." He walked down the corridor, smiling. He may be short, but they knew his name. From the game room, of course, so it meant nothing. But they'd see. He'd be a good soldier, too. They'd all know his name soon enough. Not in Salamander Army, maybe, but soon enough. Petra was waiting in the corridor that led to the battle room. "Wait a minute," she said to Ender. "Rabbit Army just went in, and it takes a few minutes to change to the next battle room." Ender sat down beside her. "There's more to the battle room than just switching from one to the next," he said. "For instance, why is there gravity in the corridor outside the room just before we go in?" Petra closed her eyes. "And if the battle rooms are really free-floating, what happens when one is connected? Why doesn't it start to move with the rotation of the school?" Ender nodded. "These are the mysteries," she said in a deep whisper. "Do not pry into them. Terrible things happened to the last soldier who tried. He was discovered hanging by his feet from the ceiling of the bathroom, with his head stuffed in the toilet." Of course she was joking, but the message was clear. "So I'm not the first person to ask the question." "You remember this, little boy." When she said little boy, it sounded friendly, not contemptuous. "They never tell you any more truth than they have to, but any kid with brains knows that there have been some changes in science since the days of old Mazer Rackham and the victorious fleet. Obviously we can now control gravity, turn it on and off, change the direction, maybe reflect it. I've thought of lots of neat things you could do with gravity weapons and gravity drives on starships, and think how starships could move near planets, maybe tear big chunks out of them by reflecting the planet's own gravity back on itself, only from another direction, and focus down to a smaller point. But they say nothing." Ender understood more than she said. Manipulation of gravity was one thing, deception by the officers was another. But the most important message was this: the adults are the enemy, not the other armies. They do not tell us the truth. "Come, little boy," she said. "The battle room is ready. Petra's hands are steady. The enemy is deadly." She giggled. "Petra the poet, they call me. They also say you're crazy as a loon." "Better believe it, baby butt." She had 10 target balls in a bag. Ender held onto her suit with one hand and the wall with the other to steady her as she threw them hard in different directions. In the null gravity they bounced every which way. "Let go of me," she said. She shoved off, spinning deliberately. With a few deft hand moves she steadied herself and began aiming carefully at ball after ball. When she shot one, its glow changed from white to red. Ender knew that the color change lasted less than 2 minutes. Only one ball had changed back to white when she got the last one. She rebounded accurately from a wall and came at high speed back to Ender. He caught her and held her against her own rebound, one of the first techniques they had taught him as a launchie. "You're good," he said. "None better. And you're going to learn how to do it." Petra taught him to hold his arms straight, to aim with the whole arm. Something most soldiers don't realize is that the farther away your target is, the longer you have to hold the beam within about a 2-centimeter circle. It's the difference between 1/10 of a second and 1/2 a second, but in battle that's a long time. A lot of soldiers think they missed when they're right on target, but they moved away too fast, so you can't use your gun like a sword. Swish, swish, slice them in half. You got to aim. She used the ball caller to bring the targets back, then launched them slowly, one by one. Ender fired at them. He missed every one. "Good," she said. "You don't have any bad habits." "I don't have any good ones either," he pointed out. "I give you those." They didn't accomplish much that first morning, mostly talk. How to think while you were aiming. You've got to hold your own motion and your enemy's motion in your mind at the same time. You've got to hold your arm straight out and aim with your body, so in case your arm is frozen, you can still shoot. Learn where your trigger actually fires and ride the edge so you don't have to pull so far each time you fire. Relax your body, don't tense up, it makes you tremble. It was the only practice Ender got that day. During the Army's drills in the afternoon, Ender was ordered to bring his desk and do his schoolwork, sitting in a corner of the room. Bonzo had to bring all his soldiers to the battle room, but he didn't have to use them. Ender did not do his schoolwork, however. If he couldn't drill as a soldier, he could study Bonzo as a tactician. Salamander Army was divided into the standard 4 toons of 10 soldiers each. Some commanders set up their toons so that A toon consisted of the best soldiers, and D toon had the worst. Bonzo had mixed them so that each consisted of good soldiers and weaker ones. Except that B-Toon had only 9 boys. Ender wondered who had been transferred to make room for him. It soon became plain that the leader of Toon B was new. No wonder Bonzo was so disgusted. He had lost a Toon leader to get Ender. And Bonzo was right about another thing. Ender was not ready. All the practice time was spent working on maneuvers. Toons that couldn't see each other practiced performing precision operations together with exact timing. Toons practiced using each other to make sudden changes of direction without losing formation. All these soldiers took for granted skills that Ender didn't have. The ability to make a soft landing and absorb most of the shock, accurate flight, course adjustments using the frozen soldiers floating randomly through the room, rolls, spins, dodges, sliding along the walls. A very difficult maneuver, and yet one of the most valuable since the enemy couldn't get behind you. Even as Ender learned how much he did not know, he also saw things that he could improve on. The well-rehearsed formations were a mistake. It allowed the soldiers to obey shouted orders instantly, but it also meant they were predictable. Also, the individual soldiers were given little initiative. Once a pattern was set, they were to follow it through. There was no room for adjustment to what the enemy did against the formation. Ender studied Bonzo's formations like an enemy commander would, noting ways to disrupt the formation. During free play that night, Ender asked Petra to practice with him. "No," she said. "I want to be a commander someday, so I've got to play the game room." It was a common belief that the teachers monitored the games and spotted potential commanders there. Ender doubted it, though. Toon leaders had a better chance to show what they might do as commanders than any video player. But he didn't argue with Petra. The after-breakfast practice was generous enough. Still, he had to practice, and he couldn't practice alone except a few of the basic skills. Most of the hard things required partners or teams. If only he still had Alai or Shen to practice with. Well, why shouldn't he practice with them? He had never heard of a soldier practicing with launchies, but there was no rule against it. It just wasn't done. Launchies were held in too much contempt. Well, Ender was still being treated like a launchie anyway. He needed someone to practice with, and in return he could help them learn some of the things he saw the older boys doing. "Hey, the great soldier returns," said Barnard. Ender stood in the doorway of his old barracks. He'd only been away for a day, but already it seemed like an alien place, and the others of his launch group were strangers. Almost he turned around and left. But there was Alai, who had made their friendship sacred. Alai was not a stranger. Ender made no effort to conceal how he was treated in Salamander Army. "And they're right, I'm about as useful as a sneeze in a spacesuit." Alai laughed, and other launchies started to gather around. Ender proposed his bargain. Free play every day, working hard in the battle room under Ender's direction. They would learn things from the armies, from the battles Ender would see. He would get the practice he needed in developing soldier skills. We'll get ready together. A lot of the boys wanted to come, too. "Sure," Ender said. "If you're coming to work, if you're just farting around, you're out. I don't have any time to waste." They didn't waste any time. Ender was clumsy trying to describe what he had seen, working out ways to do it, but by the time free play ended, they had learned some things. They were tired, but they were getting the knack of a few techniques. "Where were you?" said Bonzo. Ender stood stiffly by his commander's bunk. "Practicing in a battle room. I hear you had some of your old launchy group with you." "I couldn't practice alone. I won't have any soldiers in Salamander Army hanging around with launchies. You're a soldier now." Ender regarded him in silence. "Did you hear me, Wiggin?" "Yes, sir." "No more practicing with those little farts." "May I speak to you privately?" asked Ender. It was a request that commanders were required to allow. Bonzo's face went angry, and he led Ender out into the corridor. "Listen, Wiggin, I don't want you. I'm trying to get rid of you, but don't give me any problems or I'll paste you to the wall." A good commander, thought Ender, doesn't have to make stupid threats. Bonzo grew annoyed at Ender's silence. "Look, you asked me to come out here. Now talk." Sir, you were correct not to place me in a tune. I don't know how to do anything. I don't need you to tell me when I'm correct. But I'm going to become a good soldier. I won't screw up your regular drill, but I'm going to practice. And I'm going to practice with the only people who will practice with me, and that's my launchies. You'll do what I tell you, you little bastard. That's right, sir. I'll follow all the orders that you're authorized to give, but free play is free. No assignments can be given, none, by anyone. He could see Bonzo's anger growing hot. Hot anger was bad. Ender's anger was cold, and he could use it. Bonzo's was hot, and so it used him. Sir, I've got my own career to think of. I won't interfere in your training and your battles, but I've got to learn sometime. I didn't ask to be put into your army. You're trying to trade me as soon as you can. But nobody will take me if I don't know anything, will they? Let me learn something, and then you can get rid of me all the sooner and get a soldier you can really use. Bonzo was not such a fool that anger kept him from recognizing good sense when he heard it. Still, he couldn't let go of his anger immediately. While you're in Salamander Army, you'll obey me. If you try to control my free play, I can get you iced. It probably wasn't true, but it was possible. Certainly, if Ender made a fuss about it, interfering with free play could conceivably get Bonzo removed from command. Also, there was the fact that the officers obviously saw something in Ender, since they had promoted him. Maybe Ender did have influence enough with the teachers to ice somebody. Bastard, said Bonzo. It isn't my fault you gave me that order in front of everybody, Ender said. But if you want, I'll pretend you won this argument. Then tomorrow you can tell me you changed your mind. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I don't want the other guys to think you backed down. You wouldn't be able to command as well. Bonzo hated him for it, for the kindness. Ender tried to understand why. Maybe it seemed to Bonzo as if Ender were granting him his command as a favor. Galling, and yet he had no choice about anything. Well, it was Bonzo's own fault for giving Ender an unreasonable order. Still, he would only know that Ender had beaten him, and then rubbed his nose in it by being magnanimous. I'll have your ass someday, Bonzo said. Probably, said Ender. The lights-out buzzer sounded. Ender walked back into the room looking dejected, beaten, angry. The other boys drew the obvious conclusion. And in the morning, as Ender was leaving for breakfast, Bonzo stopped him and spoke loudly. I changed my mind, pinprick. Maybe by practicing with your launchies you'll learn something, and I can trade you easier. Anything to get rid of you faster. Thank you, sir, Ender said. Anything, whispered Bonzo. I hope you're iced. Ender smiled gratefully and left the room. After breakfast he practiced again with Petra. All afternoon he watched Bonzo drill and figured out ways to destroy his army. During free play, he and Alai and the others worked themselves to exhaustion. I can do this, thought Ender as he lay in his bed, his muscles throbbing, unknotting themselves. I can handle it. Salamander Army had a battle 4 days later. Ender followed behind the real soldiers as they jogged along the corridors to the battle room. There were 2 ribbons along the walls, the green-green-brown of Salamander and the black-white-black of Condor. When they came to the place where the battle room had always been, the corridor split instead, with green-green-brown leading to the left and black-white-black to the right. Around another turn to the right, and the army stopped in front of a blank wall. The tunes formed up in silence. Ender stayed behind them all. Bonzo was giving his instructions. A, take the handles and go up. B, left. C, right. D, down. He saw that the tunes were oriented to follow instructions, then added, And you, pinprick, wait 4 minutes, then come just inside the door. Don't even take your gun off your suit. Ender nodded. Suddenly the wall behind Bonzo became transparent. Not a wall at all, then, but a force field. The battle room was different, too. Huge brown boxes were suspended in midair, partially obstructing the view. So these were the obstacles that the soldiers called stars. They were distributed seemingly at random. Bonzo seemed not to care where they were. Apparently the soldiers already knew how to handle the stars. But it soon became clear to Ender, as he sat and watched the battle from the corridor, that they did not know how to handle the stars. They did know how to soft land on one and use it for cover, the tactics of assaulting the enemy's position on a star. They showed no sense at all of which stars mattered. They persisted in assaulting stars that could have been bypassed by wall sliding to a more advanced position. The other commander was taking advantage of Bonzo's neglect of strategy. Condor Army forced the salamanders into costly assaults. Fewer and fewer salamanders were unfrozen for the attack on the next star. It was clear after only 4 minutes that Salamander Army could not defeat the enemy by attacking. Ender stepped through the gate. He drifted slightly downward. The battle rooms he had practiced in always had their doors at floor level. For real battles, however, the door was set in the middle of the wall, as far from the floor as from the ceiling. Abruptly he felt himself reorient, as he had in the shuttle. What had been down was now up and now sideways. In nullo, there was no reason to stay oriented the way he had been in the corridor. It was impossible to tell, looking at the perfectly square doors, which way had been up, and it didn't matter. For now, Ender had found the orientation that made sense. The enemy's gate was down. The object of the game was to fall toward the enemy's home. Ender made the motions that oriented himself in his new direction. Instead of being spread out, his whole body presented to the enemy. Now Ender's legs pointed toward them. He was a much smaller target. Someone saw him. He was, after all, drifting aimlessly in the open. Instinctively, he pulled his legs up under him. At that moment he was flashed, and the legs of his suit froze in position. His arms remained unfrozen. For without a direct body hit, only the limbs that were shot froze up. It occurred to Ender that if he had not been presenting his legs to the enemy, it would have been his body they hit. He would have been immobilized. Since Bonzo had ordered him not to draw his weapon, Ender continued to drift, not moving his head or arms, as if they had been frozen too. The enemy ignored him and concentrated their fire on the soldiers who were firing at them. It was a bitter battle. Outnumbered now, Salamander Army gave ground stubbornly. The battle disintegrated into a dozen individual shootouts. Bonzo's discipline paid off now, for each salamander that froze took at least one enemy with him. No one ran or panicked. Everyone remained calm and aimed carefully. Petra was especially deadly. Condor Army noticed it and took great effort to freeze her. They froze her shooting arm first, and her stream of curses was only interrupted when they froze her completely and the helmet clamped down on her jaw. In a few minutes it was over. Salamander Army offered no more resistance. Ender noted with pleasure that Condor could only muster the minimal 5 soldiers necessary to open the gate to victory. 4 of them touched their helmets to the lighted spots at the 4 corners of Salamander's door, while the 5th passed through the force field. That ended the game. The lights came back on to their full brightness, and Anderson came out of the teacher door. I could have drawn my gun and shot just one of them, and they would have been too few. The game would have been a draw. Without 4 men to touch the 4 corners and a 5th man to pass through the gate, Condor would have had no victory. Bonzo, you ass. I could have saved you from this defeat. Maybe even turned it to victory, since they were sitting there, easy targets. They wouldn't have known at first where the shots were coming from. I'm a good enough shot for that. But orders were orders, and Ender had promised to obey. He did get some satisfaction out of the fact that on the official tally, Salamander Army recorded not the expected 41 disabled or eliminated, but rather 40 eliminated and 1 damaged. Bonzo couldn't understand it until he consulted Anderson's book and realized who it was. I was only damaged, Bonzo, thought Ender. I could still shoot. He expected Bonzo to come to him and say, next time when it's like that you can shoot, but Bonzo didn't say anything to him at all until the next morning after breakfast. Of course, Bonzo ate in the commander's mess, but Ender was pretty sure the odd score would cause as much stir there as it did in the soldiers' dining hall. In every other game that wasn't a draw, every member of the losing team was either eliminated, totally frozen, or disabled, which meant they had some body parts still unfrozen but were unable to shoot or inflict damage on the enemy. Salamander was the only losing army with 1 man in the damaged but active category. Ender volunteered no explanation. But the other members of Salamander Army let it be known why it had happened, and when other boys asked him why he hadn't disobeyed orders and fired, he calmly answered, "I obey orders." After breakfast, Bonzo looked for him. "The order still stands," he said, "and don't you forget it." "It will cost you, you fool. I may not be a good soldier, but I can still help, and there's no reason you shouldn't let me." Ender said nothing. An interesting side effect of the battle was that Ender emerged at the top of the soldier efficiency list. Since he hadn't fired a shot, he had a perfect record on shooting, no misses at all, and since he had never been eliminated or disabled, his percentage there was excellent. No one else came close. It made a lot of the boys laugh, and others were angry, but on the prized efficiency list, Ender was now the leader. He kept sitting out the Army practice sessions, and kept working hard on his own with Petra in the mornings and his friends at night. More launchies were joining them now, not on a lark, but because they could see results. They were getting better and better. Ender and Eli stayed ahead of them, though. In part, it was because Eli kept trying new things, which forced Ender to think of new tactics to cope with them. In part, it was because they kept making stupid mistakes, which suggested things to do that no self-respecting, well-trained soldier would even have tried. Many of the things they attempted turned out to be useless, but it was always fun, always exciting, and enough things worked that they knew it was helping them. Evening was the best time of day. The next 2 battles were easy Salamander victories. Ender came in after 4 minutes and remained untouched by the defeated enemy. Ender began to realize that Condor Army, which had beaten them, was unusually good. Salamander, weak as Bonzo's grasp of strategy might be, was one of the better teams, climbing steadily in the ratings, clawing for 4th place with Rat Army. Ender turned 7. They weren't much for dates and calendars at the battle school, but Ender had found out how to bring up the date on his desk, and he noticed his birthday. The school noticed it, too. They took his measurements and issued him a new Salamander uniform and a new flash suit for the battle room. He went back to the barracks with the new clothing on. It felt strange and loose, like his skin no longer fit properly. He wanted to stop at Petra's bunk and tell her about his home, about what his birthdays were usually like. Just tell her it was his birthday so she'd say something about it being a happy one. But nobody told birthdays. It was childish. It was what landsiders did, cakes and silly customs. Valentine baked him his cake on his 6th birthday. It fell, and it was terrible. Nobody knew how to cook anymore. It was the kind of crazy thing Valentine would do. Everybody teased Valentine about it, but Ender saved a little bit of it in his cupboard. Then they took out his monitor, and he left, and for all he knew it was still there, a little piece of greasy, yellow dust. Nobody talked about home, not among the soldiers. There had been no life before battle school. Nobody got letters, and nobody wrote any. Everybody pretended that they didn't care. But I do care, thought Ender. The only reason I'm here is so that a bugger won't shoot out Valentine's eye, won't blast her head open like the soldiers in the videos of the first battles with the buggers, won't split her head with a beam so hot that her brains burst the skull and spill out like rising bread dough, the way it happens in my worst nightmares and my worst nights when I wake up trembling but silent, must keep silent or they'll hear that I miss my family. I want to go home. It was better in the morning. Home was merely a dull ache in the back of his memory, a tiredness in his eyes. That morning Bonzo came in as they were dressing. "Flash suits," he called. It was a battle. Ender's 4th game. The enemy was Leopard Army. It would be easy. Leopard was new, and it was always in the bottom quarter in the standings. It had been organized only 6 months ago, with Paul Slattery as its commander. Ender put on his new battle suit and got into line. Bonzo pulled him roughly out of line and made him march at the end. "You didn't need to do that," Ender said silently. "You could have let me stay in line." Ender watched from the corridor. Paul Slattery was young, but he was sharp. He had some new ideas. He kept his soldiers moving, darting from star to star, wall-sliding to get behind and above the stolid salamanders. Ender smiled. Bonzo was hopelessly confused, and so were his men. Leopard seemed to have men in every direction. However, the battle was not as lopsided as it seemed. Ender noticed that Leopard was losing a lot of men, too. Their reckless tactics exposed them too much. What mattered, however, was that Salamander felt defeated. They had surrendered the initiative completely. Though they were still fairly evenly matched with the enemy, they huddled together like the last survivors of a massacre, as if they hoped the enemy would overlook them in the carnage. Ender slipped slowly through the gate, oriented himself so the enemy's gate was down, and drifted slowly eastward to a corner where he wouldn't be noticed. He even fired at his own legs to hold them in the kneeling position that offered him the best protection. He looked to any casual glance like another frozen soldier who had drifted helplessly out of the battle. With Salamander army waiting abjectly for destruction, Leopard obligingly destroyed them. When Salamander finally stopped firing, Leopard had 9 boys left. They formed up and started to open the Salamander gate. Ender aimed carefully with a straight arm, as Petra had taught him. Before anyone knew what was happening, he froze 3 of the soldiers who were about to press their helmets against the lighted corners of the door. Then some of the others spotted him and fired, but at first they hit only his already frozen legs. It gave him time to get the last 2 men at the gate. Leopard had only 4 men left unfrozen when Ender was finally hit in the arm and disabled. The game was a draw, and they never had hit him in the body. Paul Slattery was furious, but there had been nothing unfair about it. Everyone in Leopard Army assumed that it had been a strategy of Bonzo's to leave a man till the last minute. It didn't occur to them that little Ender had fired against orders. But Salamander Army knew. Bonzo knew, and Ender could see from the way his commander looked at him that Bonzo hated him for rescuing him from total defeat. "I don't care," Ender told himself. "It will just make me easier to trade away, and in the meantime you won't drop so far in the standings. Just trade me. I've learned all I'm ever going to learn from you. How to fail with style. That's all you know, Bonzo. What have I learned so far?" Ender listed things in his mind as he undressed by his bunk. The enemy's gate is down. Use my legs as a shield in battle. A small reserve held back until the end of the game can be decisive. And soldiers can sometimes make decisions that are smarter than the orders they've been given. Naked, he was about to climb into bed when Bonzo came toward him, his face hard and set. "I have seen Peter like this," thought Ender, silent with murder in his eye. But Bonzo is not Peter. Bonzo has more fear. "Wiggin, I finally traded you. I was able to persuade Rat Army that your incredible place on the efficiency list is more than an accident. You go over there tomorrow." "Thank you, sir," Ender said. Perhaps he sounded too grateful. Suddenly Bonzo swung at him, caught his jaw with a vicious open-handed slap. It knocked Ender sideways into his bunk, and he almost fell. Then Bonzo slugged him hard in the stomach. Ender dropped to his knees. "You disobeyed me," Bonzo said, loudly for all to hear. "No good soldier ever disobeys." Even as he cried from the pain, Ender could not help but take vengeful pleasure in the murmurs he heard rising through the barracks. "You fool, Bonzo. You aren't enforcing discipline, you're destroying it. They know I turned defeat into a draw, and now they see how you repay me. You made yourself look stupid in front of everyone. What is your discipline worth now?" The next day, Ender told Petra that for her sake the shooting practice in the morning would have to end. Bonzo didn't need anything that looked like a challenge now, and so she'd better stay clear of Ender for a while. She understood perfectly. "Besides," she said, "you're as close to being a good shot as you'll ever be." He left his desk and flash suit in the locker. He would wear his salamander uniform until he could get to the commissary and change it for the brown and black of Rat. He had brought no possessions with him. He would take none away. There were none to have. Everything of value was in the school computer or his own head and hands. He used one of the public desks in the game room to register for an Earth Gravity personal combat course during the hour immediately after breakfast. He didn't plan to get vengeance on Bonzo for hitting him, but he did intend that no one would be able to do that to him again.
Colonel Graff, the games have always been run fairly before, either random distribution of stars or symmetrical.
Fairness is a wonderful attribute, Major Anderson. It has nothing to do with war.
The game will be compromised. The comparative standings will become meaningless.
Alas.
It will take months, years to develop the new battle rooms and run the simulations.
That's why I'm asking you now. To begin, be creative. Think of every stacked, impossible, unfair star arrangement you can. Think of other ways to bend the rules. Late notification, unequal forces. Then run the simulations and see which ones are hardest, which easiest. We want an intelligent progression here. We want to bring him along.
When do you plan to make him a commander? When he's 8?
Of course not. I haven't assembled his army yet.
Oh, so you're stacking it that way too.
You're getting too close to the game, Anderson. You're forgetting that it is merely a training exercise.
It's also status, identity, purpose, name. All that makes these children who they are comes out of this game. When it becomes known that the game can be manipulated, weighted, cheated, it will undo this whole school. I'm not exaggerating.
I know.
So I hope Ender Wiggin truly is the one, because you'll have degraded the effectiveness of our training method for a long time to come.
If Ender isn't the one, if his peak of military brilliance does not coincide with the arrival of our fleet at the Bugger homeworlds, then it doesn't really matter what our training method is or isn't.
I hope you will forgive me, Colonel Graff, but I feel that I must report your orders and my opinion of their consequences to the strategos and the hegemon.
Why not our dear Polomark?
Everybody knows you have him in your pocket.
Such hostility, Major Anderson. And I thought we were friends.
We are. And I think you may be right about Ender. I just don't believe you and you alone should decide the fate of the world.
I don't even think it's right for me to decide the fate of Ender Wiggin.
So you won't mind if I notify them?
Of course I mind, you meddlesome ass. This is something to be decided by people who know what they're doing, not these frightened politicians who got their office because they happen to be politically potent in the country they come from.
But you understand why I'm doing it.
Because you're such a short-sighted little bureaucratic bastard that you think you need to cover yourself in case things go wrong. Well, if things go wrong, we'll all be bugger meat. So trust me now, Anderson, and don't bring the whole damn hegemony down on my neck. What I'm doing is hard enough without them.
Oh, is it unfair? Are things stacked against you? You can do it to Ender, but you can't take it. Is that it?
Ender Wiggin is 10 times smarter and stronger than I am. What I'm doing to him will bring out his genius. If I had to go through it myself, it would crush me. Major Anderson, I know I'm wrecking the game, and I know you love it better than any of the boys who play. Hate me if you like, but don't stop me.
I reserve the right to communicate with the hegemony and the strategoi at any time. But for now, do what you want.
Thank you so very kindly.
Ender Wiggin, the little farthead who leads the standings. What a pleasure to have you with us. The commander of Rat Army lay sprawled on the lower bunk wearing only his desk. With you around, how can any army lose? Several of the boys nearby laughed. There could have not been two more opposite armies than Salamander and Rat. The room was rumpled, cluttered, noisy. After Bonzo, Ender had thought that undiscipline would be a welcome relief. Instead, he found that he had come to expect quiet and order, and the disorder here made him uncomfortable. "We doin' okay, Ender Benda. I rose the nose, Jew boy extraordinaire, and you ain't nothing but a pinhead pinprick of a goy. Don't you forget it." Since the IF was formed, the strategos of the military forces had always been a Jew. There was a myth that Jewish generals didn't lose wars, and so far it was still true. It made any Jew in the battle school dream of being strategos, and conferred prestige on him from the start. It also caused resentment. Rat Army was often called the Kike Force, half in praise, half in parody of Mazer Rackham's Strike Force. There were many who liked to remember that during the second invasion, even though an American Jew as president was hegemon of the alliance, an Israeli Jew was strategos in overall command of IF defense, and a Russian Jew was polemarch of the fleet, it was Maser Rackham, a little-known, twice court-martialed, half-Maori New Zealander whose strike force broke up and finally destroyed the bugger fleet in the action around Saturn. If Maser Rackham could save the world, then it didn't matter a bit whether you were a Jew or not, people said. But it did matter. And Rose the Nose knew it. He mocked himself to forestall the mocking comments of anti-Semites. Almost everyone he defeated in battle became, at least for a time, a Jew-hater. But he also made sure everyone knew what he was. His army was in second place, bucking for first. I took you on, Goy, because I didn't want people to think I only win because I got great soldiers. I want them to know that even with a little puke of a soldier like you, I can still win. We only got 3 rules here. Do what I tell you, and don't piss in the bed. Ender nodded. He knew that Rose wanted him to ask what the 3rd rule was. So he did. That was 3 rules. We don't do too good in math here. The message was clear. Winning is more important than anything. Your practice sessions with half-assed little launchies are over, Wiggin. Done. You're in the big boys' army now. I'm putting you in Dink Mika's tune. From now on, as far as you're concerned, Dink Mika is God. Then who are you? The personnel officer who hired God. Rose grinned. And you are forbidden to use your desk again until you've frozen 2 enemy soldiers in the same battle. This order is out of self-defense. I hear you're a genius programmer. I don't want you screwing around with my desk. Everybody erupted in laughter. It took Ender a moment to understand why. Rose had programmed his desk to display and animate a bigger-than-life-size picture of male genitals, which waggled back and forth as Rose held the desk on his naked lap. This is just the sort of commander Bonzo would trade me to, thought Ender. How does a boy who spends his time like this win battles? Ender found Dink Meeker in the game room, not playing, just sitting and watching. A guy pointed you out, Ender said. I'm Ender Wiggin. I know, said Meeker. I'm in your tune. I know, he said again. I'm pretty inexperienced. Dink looked up at him. Look, Wiggin, I know all this. Why do you think I asked Rose to get you for me? He had not been dumped. He had been picked up. He had been asked for. Meeker wanted him. Why? Asked Ender. I've watched your practice sessions with the launchies. I think you show some promise. Bonzo is stupid, and I wanted you to get better training than Petra could give you. All she can do is shoot. I needed to learn that. You still move like you were afraid to wet your pants. So teach me. So learn. I'm not going to quit my free time practice sessions. I don't want you to quit them. Rose the Nose does. Rose the Nose can't stop you. Likewise, he can't stop you from using your desk. So why did he order it? Listen, Ender. Commanders have just as much authority as you let them have. The more you obey them, the more power they have over you. What's to stop them from hurting me? Ender remembered Bonzo's blow. I thought that was why you were taking personal attack classes. You've really been watching me, haven't you? Dink didn't answer. I don't want to get Rose mad at me. I want to be part of the battles now. I'm tired of sitting out till the end. Your standings will go down. This time Ender didn't answer. Listen, Ender. As long as you're part of my tune, you're part of the battle. Ender soon learned why. Dink trained his tune independently from the rest of Rat Army with discipline and vigor. He never consulted with Rose, and only rarely did the whole army maneuver together. It was as if Rose commanded one army, and Dink commanded a much smaller one that happened to practice in the battle room at the same time. Dink started out the first practice by asking Ender to demonstrate his feet-first attack position. The other boys didn't like it. How can we attack lying on our backs, they asked. To Ender's surprise, Dink didn't correct them, didn't say, you aren't attacking on your back, you're dropping downward toward them. He had seen what Ender was doing, but he had not understood the orientation that it implied. It soon became clear to Ender that even though Dink was very, very good, His persistence in holding onto the corridor gravity orientation instead of thinking of the enemy gate as downward was limiting his thinking. They practiced attacking an enemy-held star. Before trying Ender's feet-first method, they had always gone in standing up, their whole bodies available as a target. Even now, though, they reached the star and then assaulted the enemy from one direction only. "Over the top!" cried Dink, and over they went. To his credit, he then repeated the exercise, calling, "Again, upside down." But because of their insistence on a gravity that didn't exist, the boys became awkward when the maneuver was under, as if vertigo seized them. They hated the feet-first attack. Dink insisted that they use it. As a result, they hated Ender. "Do we have to learn how to fight from a launchy?" one of them muttered, making sure Ender could hear. "Yes," answered Dink. They kept working, and they learned it. In practice skirmishes, they began to realize how much harder it was to shoot an enemy who was attacking feet first. As soon as they were convinced of that, they practiced the maneuver more willingly. That night was the first time Ender had come to one of his launchy practice sessions after a whole afternoon of work. He was tired. "Now you're really in an army," said Eli. "You don't have to keep practicing with us." "From you I can learn things that nobody knows," said Ender. "Dink Meeker is the best. I hear he's your tune leader." "Then let's get busy. I'll teach you what I learned from him today." He put Eli and 24 others through the same exercises that had worn him out all afternoon. But he put new touches on the pattern, made the boys try the maneuvers with one leg frozen, with both legs frozen, or using frozen boys for leverage to change directions. Halfway through the practice, Ender noticed Petra and Dink together standing in the doorway watching. Later, when he looked again, they were gone. "So they're watching me. And what we're doing is known." He did not know whether Dink was his friend. He believed that Petra was, but nothing could be sure. They might be angry that he was doing what only commanders and tune leaders were supposed to do, drilling and training soldiers. They might be offended that a soldier would associate so closely with launchies. It made him uneasy to have older children watching. "I thought I told you not to use your desk." Rose the Nose stood by Ender's bunk. Ender did not look up. "I'm completing the trigonometry assignment for tomorrow." Rose bumped his knee into Ender's desk. "I said not to use it." Ender set the desk on his bunk and stood up. "I need trigonometry more than I need you." Rose was taller than Ender by at least 40 centimeters, but Ender was not particularly worried. It would not come to physical violence, and if it did, Ender thought he could hold his own. Rose was lazy and didn't know personal combat. "You're going down in the standings, boy," said Rose. "I expect to. I was only leading the list because of the stupid way Salamander Army was using me." "Stupid? Bonzo's strategy won a couple of key games." "Bonzo's strategy wouldn't win a salad fight. I was violating orders every time I fired my gun." Rose hadn't known that. It made him angry. "So everything Bonzo said about you was a lie. You're not only short and incompetent, you're insubordinate, too." "But I turned defeat into stalemate all by myself." "We'll see how you do all by yourself next time." Rose went away. One of Ender's tune mates shook his head. "You dumb as a thumb." Ender looked at Dink, who was doodling on his desk. Dink looked up, noticed Ender watching him, and gazed steadily back at him. No expression, nothing. "Okay," thought Ender, "I can take care of myself." Battle came 2 days later. It was Ender's first time fighting as part of a tune. He was nervous. Dink's tune lined up against the right-hand wall of the corridor, and Ender was very careful not to lean, not to let his weight slip to either side. Stay balanced. "Wiggin!" called Rose the Nose. Ender felt dread come over him from throat to groin, a tingle of fear that made him shudder. Rose saw it. "Shiverin', tremblin', don't wet your pants, little launchy." Rose hooked a finger over the butt of Ender's gun and pulled him to the force field that hid the battle room from view. "We'll see how well you do now, Ender. As soon as that door opens, you jump through. Go straight ahead toward the enemy's door." Suicide. Pointless, meaningless self-destruction. But he had to follow orders now. This was battle, not school. For a moment, Ender raged silently. Then he calmed himself. "Excellent, sir," he said. "The direction I fire my gun is the direction of their main contingent." Rose laughed. "You won't have time to fire anything, pinprick." The wall vanished. Ender jumped up, took hold of the ceiling handholds, and threw himself out and down, speeding toward the enemy door. It was Centipede Army, and they only began to emerge from their door when Ender was halfway across the battle room. Many of them were able to get under cover of stars quickly, but Ender had doubled up his legs under him, and holding his pistol at his crotch, he was firing between his legs and freezing many of them as they emerged. They flashed his legs, but he had 3 precious seconds before they could hit his body and put him out of action. He froze several more, then flung out his arms in equal and opposite directions. The hand that held his gun ended up pointing toward the main body of Centipede Army. He fired into the mass of the enemy, and then they froze him. A second later, he smashed into the force field of the enemy's door and rebounded with a crazy spin. He landed in a group of enemy soldiers behind a star. They shoved him off and spun him even more rapidly. He rebounded out of control through the rest of the battle, though gradually friction with the air slowed him down. He had no way of knowing how many men he had frozen before getting iced himself, but he did get the general idea that Rat Army won again, as usual. After the battle, Rose didn't speak to him. Ender was still first in the standings, since he had frozen 3, disabled 2, and damaged 7. There was no more talk about insubordination and whether Ender could use his desk. Rose stayed in his part of the barracks and left Ender alone. Dink Meeker began to practice instant emergence from the corridor. Ender's attack on the enemy while they were still coming out of the door had been devastating. If one man can do that much damage, think what a toon can do. Dink got Major Anderson to open a door in the middle of a wall even during practice sessions instead of just the floor-level door, so they could practice launching under battle conditions. Word got around. From now on, no one could take 5 or 10 or 15 seconds in the corridor to size things up. The game had changed. More battles. This time Ender played a proper role within a toon. He made mistakes. Skirmishes were lost. He dropped from 1st to 2nd in the standings, then to 4th. Then he made fewer mistakes and began to feel comfortable within the framework of the toon, and he went back up to 3rd, then 2nd, then 1st. After practice one afternoon, Ender stayed in the battle room. He had noticed that Dink Meeker usually came late to dinner, and he assumed it was for extra practice. Ender wasn't very hungry, and he wanted to see what it was Dink practiced when no one else could see. But Dink didn't practice. He stood near the door watching Ender. Ender stood across the room, watching Dink. Neither spoke. It was plain Dink expected Ender to leave. It was just as plain that Ender was saying no. Dink turned his back on Ender, methodically took off his flash suit, and gently pushed off from the floor. He drifted slowly toward the center of the room, very slowly, his body relaxing almost completely so that his hands and arms seemed to be caught by almost non-existent air currents in the room. After the speed and tension of practice, the exhaustion, the alertness, it was restful just to watch him drift. He did it for 10 minutes or so before he reached another wall. Then he pushed off rather sharply, returned to his flash suit, and pulled it on. "Come on," he said to Ender. They went to the barracks. The room was empty since all the boys were at dinner. Each went to his own bunk and changed into regular uniforms. Ender walked to Dink's bunk and waited for a moment till Dink was ready to go. "Why did you wait?" asked Dink. "Wasn't hungry." "Well, now you know why I'm not a commander." Ender had wondered. "Actually, they promoted me twice, and I refused." Refused. The second time, they took away my old locker and bunk and desk, assigned me to a commander's cabin, and gave me an army, but I just stayed in the cabin until they gave in and put me back into somebody else's army. "Why?" "Because I won't let them do it to me. I can't believe you haven't seen through all this crap yet, Ender, but I guess you're young. These other armies, they aren't the enemy. It's the teachers. They're the enemy. They get us to fight each other, to hate each other. The game is everything. Win, win, win. It amounts to nothing. We kill ourselves, go crazy trying to beat each other, and all the time the old bastards are watching us, studying us, discovering our weak points, deciding whether we're good enough or not. Well, good enough for what? I was 6 years old when they brought me here. What the hell did I know? They decided I was right for the program, but nobody ever asked me if the program was right for me. So why don't you go home? Dink smiled crookedly. Because I can't give up the game. He tugged at the fabric of his flash suit, which lay on the bunk beside him. Because I love this. So why not be a commander? Dink shook his head. Never. Look what it does to Rosen. The boy's crazy. Rose the nose. Sleeps in here with us instead of in his cabin. Why? Because he's scared to be alone, Ender. Scared of the dark. Rose? But they made him a commander, and so he has to act like one. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's winning, but that scares him worst of all because he doesn't know why he's winning, except that I have something to do with it. Any minute, somebody could find out that Rosen isn't some magic Israeli general who can win no matter what. He doesn't know why anybody wins or loses. Nobody does. It doesn't mean he's crazy, Dink. I know. You've been here a year. You think these people are normal. Well, they're not. We're not. I look in the library. I call up books on my desk, old ones because they won't let us have anything new, but I've got a pretty good idea what children are. And we're not children. Children can lose sometimes and nobody cares. Children aren't in armies. They aren't commanders and they don't rule over 40 other kids. It's more than anybody can take and not get crazy. Ender tried to remember what other children were like in his class at school back in the city. But all he could think of was Stilson. I had a brother, just a normal guy. All he cared about was girls. And flying. He wanted to fly. He used to play ball with the guys. A pickup game. Shooting balls at a hoop, dribbling down the corridors until the peace officers confiscated your ball. We had a great time. He was teaching me how to dribble when I was taken. Ender remembered his own brother, and the memory was not fond. Dink misunderstood the expression on Ender's face. Hey, I know, nobody's supposed to talk about home, but we came from somewhere. The battle school didn't create us, you know. The battle school doesn't create anything, it just destroys. And we all remember things from home. Maybe not good things, but we remember and then we lie and pretend that... Look, Ender, why is it that nobody talks about home ever? Doesn't that tell you how important it is? That nobody even admits that... Oh, hell. No, it's all right, Ender said. I was just thinking about Valentine, my sister. I wasn't trying to make you upset. It's okay. I don't think of her very much because I always get like this. That's right. We never cry. I never thought of that. Nobody ever cries. We really are trying to be adults, just like our fathers. I bet your father was like you. I bet he was quiet and took it and then busted out, and I'm not like my father. So maybe I'm wrong. But look at Bonzo, your old commander. He's got an advanced case of Spanish honor. He can't allow himself to have weaknesses. To be better than him, that's an insult. To be stronger, that's like cutting off his balls. That's why he hates you, because you didn't suffer when he tried to punish you. He hates you for that. He honestly wants to kill you. He's crazy. They're all crazy. And you aren't? I be crazy too, little buddy. But at least when I be craziest, I be floating all alone in space, and the crazy she float out of me, she soak into the walls, and she don't come out till there be battles, and little boys bump into the walls and squish out the crazy. Ender smiled. And you be crazy too, said Dink. Come on. Let's go eat. Maybe you can be a commander and not be crazy. Maybe knowing about craziness means you don't have to fall for it. I'm not going to let the bastards run me, Ender. They've got you pegged too, and they don't plan to treat you kindly. Look what they've done to you so far. They haven't done anything except promote me. And she make you life so easy, ne? Ender laughed and shook his head. So maybe you're right. They think they got you on ice. Don't let them. But that's what I came for, Ender said. For them to make me into a tool to save the world. I can't believe you still believe it. Believe what? The bugger menace? Save the world? Listen, Ender, if the buggers were coming back to get us, they'd be here. They aren't invading again. We beat them and they're gone. But the videos, all from the first and second invasions. Your grandparents weren't born yet when Mazer Rackham wiped them out. You watch, it's all a fake. There is no war, and they're just screwing around with us. But why? Because as long as people are afraid of the buggers, the IF can stay in power. And as long as the IF is in power, certain countries can keep their hegemony. But keep watching the vids, Ender. People will catch on to this game pretty soon, and there will be a civil war to end all wars. That's the menace, Ender, not the buggers. And in that war, when it comes, you and I won't be friends because you're American, just like our dear teachers, and I am not. They went to the mess hall and ate, talking about other things. But Ender could not stop thinking about what Dink had said. The battle school was so enclosed, the game so important in the minds of the children that Ender had forgotten there was a world outside. Spanish honor, civil war, politics. The battle school was really a very small place, wasn't it? But Ender did not reach Dink's conclusions. The buggers were real. The threat was real. The IF controlled a lot of things, but it didn't control the videos and the nets. Not where Ender had grown up. In Dink's home in the Netherlands, with 3 generations under Russian hegemony, perhaps it was all controlled. But Ender knew that lies could not last long in America, so he believed. Believed. But the seed of doubt was there, and it stayed. And every now and then sent out a little root. It changed everything to have that seed growing. It made Ender listen more carefully to what people meant instead of what they said. It made him wise. There weren't as many boys at the evening practice, not by half. "Where's Bernard?" asked Ender. Alai grinned. Shen closed his eyes and assumed a look of blissful meditation. "Haven't you heard?" said another boy, a launchie from a younger group. "Word's out that any launchie who comes to your practice sessions won't ever amount to anything in anybody's army. Word's out that the commanders don't want any soldiers who've been damaged by your training." Ender nodded. "But the way I brain it," said the launchie, "I be the best soldier I can, and any commander worth a damn he'd take me, nay?" "Eh," said Ender, with finality. They went on with practice. About a half hour into it, when they were practicing throwing off collisions with frozen soldiers, several commanders in different uniforms came in. They ostentatiously took down names. "Hey," shouted Alai, "make sure you spell my name right." The next night there were even fewer boys. Now Ender was hearing the stories. Little launchies getting slapped around in the bathrooms, or having accidents in the mess hall and the game room, or getting their files trashed by older boys who had broken the primitive security system that guarded the launchies' desks. "No practice tonight," Ender said. "The hell there's not," said Alai. "Give it a few days. I don't want any of the little kids getting hurt. If you stop, even one night, they'll figure it works to do this kind of thing, just like if you'd ever back down to Bernard back when he was being a swine. Besides," said Shen, "we aren't scared and we don't care, so you owe it to us to go on. We need the practice and so do you." Ender remembered what Dink had said. The game was trivial compared to the whole world. Why should anyone give every night of his life to this stupid, stupid game? "We don't accomplish that much anyway," Ender said. He started to leave. Alai stopped him. "They scare you too? They slap you up in the bathroom? Stick your head in the pissa? Somebody gots a gun up you bung?" "No," Ender said. "You still my friend?" asked Alai, more quietly. "Yes." "Then I still you, friend Ender, and I stay here and practice with you." The older boys came again, but fewer of them were commanders. Most were members of a couple of armies. Ender recognized salamander uniforms, even a couple of rats. They didn't take names this time. Instead, they mocked and shouted and ridiculed as the launchies tried to master difficult skills with untrained muscles. It began to get to a few of the boys. "Listen to them," Ender said to the other boys. "Remember the words. If you ever want to make your enemy crazy, shout that kind of stuff at them. It makes them do dumb things to be mad. But we don't get mad." Shen took the idea to heart, and after each jibe from the older boys, he had a group of 4 launchies recite the words loudly 5 or 6 times. When they started singing the taunts like nursery rhymes, some of the older boys launched themselves from the wall and came out for a fight. The flash suits were designed for wars fought with harmless light. They offered little protection and seriously hampered movement if it came to hand-to-hand fighting in Nullo. Half of the boys were flashed anyway and couldn't fight, but the stiffness of their suits made them potentially useful. Ender quickly ordered his launchies to gather in one corner of the room. The older boys laughed at them even more, and some who had waited by the wall came forward to join in the attack, seeing Ender's group in retreat. Ender and Alai decided to throw a frozen soldier in the face of an enemy. The frozen launchie struck helmet first, and the two caromed off each other. The older boy clutched his chest where the helmet had hit him and screamed in pain. The mockery was over. The rest of the older boys launched themselves to enter the battle. Ender didn't really have much hope of any of the boys getting away without some injury. But the enemy was coming haphazardly, uncoordinatedly. They had never worked together before, while Ender's little practice army, though there were only a dozen of them now, knew each other well and knew how to work together. "Go Nova!" shouted Ender. The other boys laughed. They gathered into 3 groups, feet together, squatting, holding hands so they formed small stars against the back wall. "We'll go around them and make for the door. Now!" At his signal, the 3 stars burst apart, each boy launching in a different direction, but angled so he could rebound off a wall and head for the door. Since all of the enemy were in the middle of the room, where course changes were far more difficult, it was an easy maneuver to carry out. Ender had positioned himself so that when he launched, he would rendezvous with the frozen soldier he had just used as a missile. The boy wasn't frozen now, and he let Ender catch him, whirl him around, and send him toward the door. Unfortunately, the necessary result of the action was for Ender to head in the opposite direction and at a reduced speed. Alone of all his soldiers, he was drifting fairly slowly, and at the end of the battle room where the older boys were gathered. He shifted himself so he could see that all his soldiers were safely gathered at the far wall. In the meantime, the furious and disorganized army had just spotted him. Ender calculated how soon he would reach the wall so he could launch again. Not soon enough. Several enemies had already rebounded toward him. Ender was startled to see Stilson's face among them. Then he shuddered and realized he had been wrong. Still, it was the same situation, and this time they wouldn't sit still for a single combat settlement. There was no leader, as far as Ender knew, and these boys were a lot bigger than him. Still, he had learned some things about weight shifting in personal combat class and about the physics of moving objects. Game battles almost never got to hand-to-hand combat. You never bumped into an enemy that wasn't frozen unless you were frozen yourself. So, in the few seconds he had, Ender tried to position himself to receive his guests. Fortunately, they knew as little about Nullo fighting as he did, and the few who tried to punch him found that throwing a punch was pretty ineffective when their bodies moved backward just as quickly as their fists moved forward. But there were some in the group who had bone-breaking on their minds, as Ender quickly saw. He didn't plan to be there for it, though. He caught one of the punchers by the arm and threw him as hard as he could. It hurled Ender out of the way of the rest of the first onslaught, though he still wasn't getting any closer to the door. "Stay there," he shouted at his friends, who obviously were forming up to come and rescue him. "Just stay there." Someone caught Ender by the foot. The tight grip gave Ender some leverage. He was able to stamp firmly on the other boy's ear and shoulder, making him cry out and let go. If the boy had let go just as Ender kicked downward, it would have hurt him much less and allowed Ender to use the maneuver as a launch. Instead, the boy had hung on too well. His ear was torn and scattering blood in the air, and Ender was drifting even more slowly. "I'm doing it again," thought Ender. "I'm hurting people again just to save myself. Why don't they leave me alone so I don't have to hurt them?" 3 more boys were converging on him now, and this time they were acting together. Still, they had to grab him before they could hurt him. Ender positioned himself quickly so that 2 of them would take his feet, leaving his hands free to deal with the third. Sure enough, they took the bait. Ender grasped the shoulders of the third boy's shirt and pulled him up sharply, butting him in the face with his helmet. Again a scream and a shower of blood. The 2 boys who had his legs were wrenching at them, twisting him. Ender threw the boy with the bleeding nose at one of them. They entangled, and Ender's leg came free. It was a simple matter then to use the other boy's hold for leverage, to kick him firmly in the groin, then shove off him in the direction of the door. He didn't get that good a launch, so that his speed was nothing special, but it didn't matter. No one was following him. He got to his friends at the door. They caught him and handed him along to the door. They were laughing and slapping him playfully. "You bad," they say. "You scary. You flame." "Practice is over for the day," Ender said. "They'll be back tomorrow," said Shen. "Won't do them any good," said Ender. "If they come without suits, we'll do this again. If they come with suits, we can flash them." "Besides," said Eli, "the teachers won't let it happen." Ender remembered what Dink had told him and wondered if Eli was right. "Hey, Ender!" shouted one of the older boys as Ender left the battle room. "You nothin', man. You be nothin'." "My old commander, Bonzo," said Ender. "I think he doesn't like me." Ender checked the rosters on his desk that night. 4 boys turned up on the medical report, one with bruised ribs, one with a bruised testicle, one with a torn ear, and one with a broken nose and a loose tooth. The cause of injury was the same in all cases: accidental collision in null G. If the teachers were allowing that to turn up on the official report, it was obvious they didn't intend to punish anyone for the nasty little skirmish in the battle room. Aren't they going to do anything? Don't they care what goes on in this school? Since he was back to the barracks earlier than usual, Ender called up the fantasy game on his desk. It had been a while since he last used it, long enough that it didn't start where he had left off. Instead, he began by the giant's corpse. Only now it was hardly identifiable as a corpse at all unless you stood off a ways and studied it. The body had eroded into a hill entwined with grass and vines. Only the crest of the giant's face was still visible, and it was white bone like limestone protruding from a discouraged, withering mountain. Ender did not look forward to fighting with the wolf children again, but to his surprise they weren't there. Perhaps killed once, they were gone forever. It made him a little sad. He made his way down underground, through the tunnels to the cliff ledge overlooking the beautiful forest. Again he threw himself down, and again a cloud caught him and carried him into the castle turret room. The snake began to unweave itself from the rug again, only this time Ender did not hesitate. He stepped on the head of the snake and crushed it under his foot. It writhed and twisted under him, and in response he twisted and ground it deeper into the stone floor. Finally it was still. Ender picked it up and shook it until it unwove itself and the pattern in the rug was gone. Then, still dragging the snake behind him, he began to look for a way out. Instead he found a mirror, and in the mirror he saw a face that he easily recognized. It was Peter, with blood dripping down his chin and a snake's tail protruding from a corner of his mouth. Ender shouted and thrust his desk from him. The few boys in the barracks were alarmed at the noise, but he apologized and told them it was nothing. They went away. He looked again into his desk. His figure was still there, staring into the mirror. He tried to pick up some of the furniture to break the mirror, but it could not be moved. The mirror would not come off the wall either. Finally, Ender threw the snake at it. The mirror shattered, leaving a hole in the wall behind it. Out of the hole came dozens of tiny snakes, which quickly bit Ender's figure again and again. Tearing the snakes frantically from itself, the figure collapsed and died in a writhing heap of small serpents. The screen went blank, and words appeared. "Play again?" Ender signed off and put the desk away. The next day, several commanders came to Ender or sent soldiers to tell him not to worry. Most of them thought the extra practice sessions were a good idea, he should keep it up. And to make sure nobody bothered him, they were sending a few of their older soldiers who needed extra practice to come join him. "They're as big as most of the buggers who attacked you last night. They'll think twice." Instead of a dozen boys, there were 45 that night, more than an army. And whether it was because of the presence of older boys on Ender's side, or because they had had enough the night before, none of their enemies came. Ender didn't go back to the fantasy game, but it lived in his dreams. He kept remembering how it felt to kill the snake, grinding it in, the way he tore the ear off that boy, the way he destroyed Stilson, the way he broke Bernard's arm. And then to stand up, holding the corpse of his enemy, and find Peter's face looking out at him from the mirror. This game knows too much about me. This game tells filthy lies. I am not Peter. I don't have murder in my heart. And then a worse fear, that he was a killer, only better at it than Peter ever was, that it was this very trait that pleased the teachers. It's killers they need for the bugger wars. It's people who can grind the enemy's face into the dust and spatter their blood all over space. Well, I'm your man. I'm the bloody bastard you wanted when you had me spawned. I'm your tool. And what difference does it make if I hate the part of me that you most need? What difference does it make that when the little serpents killed me in the game, I agreed with them and was glad?
I didn't call you in here to waste time. How in hell did the computer do that?
I don't know.
How could it pick up a picture of Ender's brother and put it into the graphics in this Fairyland routine?
Kernograph. I wasn't there when it was programmed. All I know is that the computer's never taken anyone to this place before. Fairyland was strange enough, but this isn't Fairyland anymore. It's beyond the end of the world, and...
I know the names of the places. I just don't know what they mean.
Fairyland was programmed in. It's mentioned in a few other places. But nothing talks about the end of the world. We don't have any experience with it.
I don't like having the computer screw around with Ender's mind that way. Peter Wiggin is the most potent person in his life, except maybe his sister Valentine.
And the mind game is designed to help shape them, help them, find worlds they can be comfortable in.
You don't get it, do you, Major Imbu? I don't want Ender being comfortable with the end of the world. Our business here is not to be comfortable with the end of the world.
The end of the world in the game isn't necessarily the end of humanity in the Bugger Wars. It has a private meaning to Ender.
Good. What meaning?
I don't know, sir. I'm not the kid. Ask him.
Major Imbu, I'm asking you.
There could be 1,000 meanings.
Try one.
You've been isolating the boy. Maybe he's wishing for the end of this world, the battle school. Or maybe it's about the end of the world he grew up with as a little boy. His home, coming here. Or maybe it's his way of coping with having broken up so many other kids here. Ender's a sensitive kid, you know. And he's done some pretty bad things to people's bodies. He might be wishing for the end of that world.
Or none of the above.
The mind game is a relationship between the child and the computer. Together they create stories. The stories are true, in the sense that they reflect the reality of the child's life. That's all I know.
And I'll tell you what I know, Major Imbu. That picture of Peter Wiggin was not one that could have been taken from our files here at the school. We have nothing on him, electronically or otherwise, since Ender came here. And that picture is more recent.
It's only been 1.5 years, sir. How much can the boy change?
He's wearing his hair completely differently now. His mouth was redone with orthodontia. I got a recent photograph from Landside and compared. The only way the computer here in the battle school could have gotten that picture was by requisitioning it from a Landside computer, and not even one connected with the IF. That takes requisitionary powers. We can't just go into Guilford County, North Carolina, and pluck a picture out of school files. Did anyone at this school authorize getting this?
You don't understand, sir. Our battle school computer is only a part of the IF network. If we want a picture, we have to get a requisition. But if the mind game program determines that the picture is necessary,
it can just go take it.
Not just every day. Only when it's for the child's own good.
Okay, it's for his good. But why? His brother is dangerous. His brother was rejected for this program because he's one of the most ruthless and unreliable human beings we've laid hands on. Why is he so important to Ender? Why, after all this time?
Honestly, sir, I don't know. And the mind game program is designed so that it can't tell us. It may not know itself, actually. This is uncharted territory.
You mean the computer's making this up as it goes along?
You might put it that way.
Well, that does make me feel a little better. I thought I was the only one.
Valentine celebrated Ender's 8th birthday alone, in the wooded backyard of their new home in Greensboro. She scraped a patch of ground bare of pine needles and leaves, and there scratched his name in the dirt with a twig. Then she made a small teepee of twigs and needles, and lit a small fire. It made smoke that interwove with the branches and needles of the pine overhead. "All the way into space," she said silently. "All the way to the battle school." No letters had ever come, and as far as they knew, their own letters had never reached him. When he first was taken, Father and Mother sat at the table and keyed in long letters to him every few days. Soon, though, it was once a week, and when no answers came, once a month. Now it had been 2 years since he went, and there were no letters, none at all, and no remembrance on his birthday. "He is dead," she thought bitterly, "because we have forgotten him." But Valentine had not forgotten him. She did not let her parents know, and above all never hinted to Peter how often she thought about Ender, how often she wrote him letters that she knew he would not answer. And when Mother and Father had announced to them that they were leaving the city to move to North Carolina, of all places, Valentine knew that they never expected to see Ender again. They were leaving the only place where he knew to find them. How would Ender find them here among these trees, under this changeable and heavy sky? He had lived deep in corridors all his life, and if he was still in the battle school, there was less of nature there. What would he make of this? Valentine knew why they had moved here. It was for Peter, so that living among trees and small animals, so that nature, in as raw form as Mother and Father could conceive of it, might have a softening influence on their strange and frightening son. And in a way, it had. Peter took to it right away. Long walks out in the open, cutting through woods and out into the open country, going sometimes for a whole day, with only a sandwich or two sharing space with his desk in the pack on his back, with only a small pocket knife in his pocket. But Valentine knew. She had seen a squirrel, half-skinned, spiked by its little hands and feet, with twigs pushed into the dirt. She pictured Peter trapping it, staking it, then carefully parting and peeling back the skin without breaking into the abdomen, watching the muscles twist and ripple. How long had it taken the squirrel to die? And all the while Peter had sat nearby, leaning against the tree where perhaps the squirrel had nested, playing with his desk while the squirrel's life seeped away. At first, she was horrified, and nearly threw up at dinner, watching how Peter ate so vigorously, talked so cheerfully. But later she thought about it and realized that perhaps, for Peter, it was a kind of magic, like her little fires, a sacrifice that somehow stilled the dark gods that hunted for his soul. Better to torture squirrels than other children. Peter has always been a husbandman of pain, planting it, nurturing it, devouring it greedily when it was ripe. Better he should take it in these small, sharp doses than with dull cruelty to children in the school. "A model student," said his teachers. "I wish we had 100 others in the school just like him, studies all the time, turns in all his work on time. He loves to learn." But Valentine knew it was a fraud. Oh, Peter loved to learn all right, but the teachers hadn't taught him anything, ever. He did his learning through his desk at home, tapping into libraries and databases, studying and thinking, and above all, talking to Valentine. Yet at school he acted as though he were excited about the puerile lesson of the day. "Oh, wow, I never knew that frogs looked like this inside," he'd say, and then at home he studied the binding of cells into organisms through the phylotic collation of DNA. Peter was a master of flattery, and all his teachers bought it. Still, it was good Peter never fought anymore, never bullied, got along well with everybody. It was a new Peter. Everyone believed it. Father and Mother said it so often it made Valentine want to scream at them. It isn't the new Peter, it's the old Peter, only smarter. How smart? Smarter than you, Father. Smarter than you, Mother. Smarter than anybody you have ever met. But not smarter than me. I've been deciding, said Peter, whether to kill you or what. Valentine leaned against the trunk of the pine tree, her little fire a few smoldering ashes. I love you too, Peter. It would be so easy. You always make these stupid little fires. It's just a matter of knocking you out and burning you up. You're such a firebug. I've been thinking of castrating you in your sleep. No, you haven't. You only think of things like that when I'm with you. I bring out the best in you. No, Valentine, I've decided not to kill you. I've decided that you're going to help me. I am. A few years ago, Valentine would have been terrified at Peter's threats. Now, though, she was not so afraid. Not that she doubted that he was capable of killing her. She couldn't think of anything so terrible that she didn't believe Peter might do it. She also knew, though, that Peter was not insane, not in the sense that he wasn't in control of himself. He was in better control of himself than anyone she knew, except perhaps herself. Peter could delay any desire as long as he needed to. He could conceal any emotion. And so Valentine knew that he would never hurt her in a fit of rage. He would only do it if the advantages outweighed the risks. And they did not. In a way, she actually preferred Peter to other people because of this. He always acted out of intelligent self-interest. And so, to keep herself safe, all she had to do was make sure it was more in Peter's interest to keep her alive than to have her dead. Valentine, things are coming to a head. I've been tracking troop movements in Russia. What are we talking about? The world, Val. You know, Russia, big empire, the Second Warsaw Pact, rulers of Eurasia from the Netherlands to Pakistan. They don't publish their troop movements, Peter. Of course not. But they do publish their passenger and freight train schedules. I've had my desk analyzing those schedules and figuring out when the secret troop trains are moving over the same tracks. Done it backward over the past 3 years. In the last 6 months, they've stepped up. They're getting ready for war. Land war. But what about the League? What about the buggers? Valentine didn't know what Peter was getting at, but he often launched discussions like this, practical discussions of world events. He used her to test his ideas, to refine them. In the process, she also refined her own thinking. She found that while she rarely agreed with Peter about what the world ought to be, they rarely disagreed about what the world actually was. They had become quite deft at sifting accurate information out of the stories of the hopelessly ignorant, gullible news writers. The news herd, as Peter called them. The Polemarch is Russian, isn't he? And he knows what's happening with the fleet. Either they found out that the buggers aren't a threat after all, or we're about to have a big battle. One way or another, the bugger war is about to be over. They're getting ready for after the war. If they're moving troops, it must be under the direction of the Strategos. It's all internal, within the Warsaw Pact. This was troubling. The facade of peace and cooperation had been undisturbed almost since the Bugger Wars began. What Peter had detected was a fundamental shift in the world order. She had a mental picture, as clear as memory, of the way the world had been before the Buggers forced peace upon them. So it's back to the way it was before. A few changes. The shields make it so nobody bothers with nuclear weapons anymore. We have to kill each other thousands at a time, instead of millions. Peter grinned. Val, it was bound to happen. Right now there's a vast international fleet and army in existence with North American hegemony. When the Bugger Wars are over, all that power will vanish because it's all built on fear of the Buggers. And suddenly we'll look around and discover that all the old alliances are gone, dead and gone except one, the Warsaw Pact. And it'll be the dollar against 5 million lasers. Oh, we'll have the asteroid belt, but they'll have Earth. And you run out of raisins and celery kind of fast out there, without Earth. What disturbed Valentine most of all was that Peter did not seem at all worried. Peter, why do I get the idea that you're thinking of this as a golden opportunity for Peter Wiggin? For both of us, Val. Peter, you're 12 years old, I'm 10. They have a word for people our age. They call us children, and they treat us like mice. But we don't think like other children, do we, Val? We don't talk like other children, and above all, we don't write like other children. For a discussion that began with death threats, Peter, we've strayed from the topic, I think. Still, Valentine found herself getting excited. Writing was something Val did better than Peter. They both knew it. Peter had even named it once, when he said that he could always see what other people hated most about themselves and bully them, while Val could always see what other people liked best about themselves and flatter them. It was a cynical way of putting it, but it was true. Valentine could persuade other people to her point of view. She could convince them that they wanted what she wanted them to want. Peter, on the other hand, could only make them fear what he wanted them to fear. When he first pointed this out to Val, she resented it. She had wanted to believe she was good at persuading people because she was right, not because she was clever. But no matter how much she told herself that she didn't ever want to exploit people the way Peter did, she enjoyed knowing that she could, in her way, control other people. And not just control what they did. She could control, in a way, what they wanted to do. She was ashamed that she took pleasure in this power, and yet she found herself using it sometimes, to get teachers to do what she wanted and other students, to get mother and father to see things her way. Sometimes she was able to persuade even Peter. That was the most frightening thing of all, that she could understand Peter well enough, could empathize with him enough to get inside him that way. There was more Peter in her than she could bear to admit, though sometimes she dared to think about it anyway. This is what she thought as Peter spoke. You dream of power, Peter, but in my own way, I am more powerful than you. I've been studying history, Peter said. I've been learning things about patterns in human behavior. There are times when the world is rearranging itself, and at times like that, the right words can change the world. Think what Pericles did in Athens. And Demosthenes. Yes, they managed to wreck Athens twice. Oh, Pericles, yes, but Demosthenes was right about Philip, or provoked him. See, This is what historians usually do, quibble about cause and effect, when the point is, there are times when the world is in flux, and the right voice in the right place can move the world. Thomas Paine and Ben Franklin, for instance. Bismarck. Lenin. Not exactly parallel cases, Peter. Now she was disagreeing with him out of habit. She saw what he was getting at, and she thought it might just be possible. I didn't expect you to understand. You still believe that teachers know something worth learning. I understand more than you think, Peter. So, you see yourself as Bismarck. I see myself as knowing how to insert ideas into the public mind. Haven't you ever thought of a phrase, Val, a clever thing to say, and said it, and then 2 weeks or a month later, you hear some adult saying it to another adult, both of them strangers, or you see it on a video or pick it up on a net? I always figured I heard it before and only thought I was making it up. You were wrong. There are maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people in the world as smart as us, little sister. Most of them are making a living somewhere, teaching the poor bastards or doing research. Precious few of them are actually in positions of power. I guess we're the lucky few. Funny as a one-legged rabbit, Val. Of which there are, no doubt, several in these woods, hopping in neat little circles. Valentine laughed at the gruesome image and hated herself for thinking it was funny. Val, we can say the words that everyone else will be saying 2 weeks later. We can do that. We don't have to wait until we're grown up and safely put away in some career. Peter, you're 12. Not on the nets, I'm not. On the nets, I can name myself anything I want, and so can you. On the nets, we are clearly defined as students, and we can't even get into the real discussions except in audience mode, which means we can't say anything anyway. I have a plan. You always do. She pretended nonchalance, but she listened eagerly. We can get on the nets as full-fledged adults, with whatever net names we want to adopt, if Father gets us onto his citizens' access. And why would he do that? We already have student access. What do you tell him? I need citizens' access so I can take over the world? No, Val. I won't tell him anything. You'll tell him how you're worried about me. How I'm trying so very hard to do well at school, but you know it's driving me crazy because I can never talk to anybody intelligent. Everybody always talks down to me because I'm young. I never get to converse with my peers. You can prove that the stress is getting to me. There's even evidence. Valentine thought of the corpse of the squirrel in the woods and realized that even that discovery was part of Peter's plan. Or at least he had made it part of his plan after it happened. So you get him to authorize us to share his citizens' access, to adopt our own identities there, to conceal who we are so people will give us the intellectual respect we deserve. Valentine could challenge him on ideas, but never on things like this. She could not say, "What makes you think you deserve respect?" She had read about Adolf Hitler. She wondered what he was like at the age of 12. Not this smart. Not like Peter that way, but craving honor, probably that. And what would it have meant to the world if in childhood he had been caught in a thresher or trampled by a horse? "Val," Peter said, "I know what you think of me. I'm not a nice person, you think." Valentine threw a pine needle at him. "An arrow through your heart. I've been planning to come to talk to you for a long time, but I kept being afraid." She put a pine needle in her mouth and blew it at him. It dropped almost straight down. Another failed launch. Why was he pretending to be weak? "Val, I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, that you wouldn't believe I could do it." "Peter, I believe you could do anything, and probably will. But I was even more afraid that you'd believe me and try to stop me." "Oh, come on. Threaten to kill me again, Peter." Did he actually believe she could be fooled by his nice and humble kid act? "So I've got a sick sense of humor. I'm sorry. You know I was teasing. I need your help. You're just what the world needs. A 12-year-old to solve all our problems. It's not my fault I'm 12 right now. And it's not my fault that right now is when the opportunity is open. Right now is the time when I can shape events. The world is always a democracy in times of flux, and the man with the best voice will win. Everybody thinks Hitler got to power because of his armies, because they were willing to kill. And that's partly true, because in the real world, power is always built on the threat of death and dishonor. But mostly he got to power on words. On the right words at the right time. I was just thinking of comparing you to him. I don't hate Jews, Val. I don't want to destroy anybody, and I don't want war either. I want the world to hold together. Is that so bad? I don't want us to go back to the old way. Have you read about the world wars? Yes. We can go back to that again, or worse. We could find ourselves locked into the Warsaw Pact. Now there's a cheerful thought. Peter, we're children. Don't you understand that? We're going to school. We're growing up. But even as she resisted, she wanted him to persuade her. She had wanted him to persuade her from the beginning. But Peter didn't know that he had already won. If I believe that, if I accept that, then I've got to sit back and watch while all the opportunities vanish. And then when I'm old enough, it's too late. Val, listen to me. I know how you feel about me. You always have. I was a vicious, nasty brother. I was cruel to you and crueler to Ender before they took him. But I didn't hate you. I loved you both. I just had to be... had to have control. Do you understand that? It's the most important thing to me. It's my greatest gift. I can see where the weak points are. I can see how to get in and use them. I just see those things without even trying. I could become a businessman and run some big corporation. I'd scramble and maneuver until I was at the top of everything. And what would I have? Nothing. I'm going to rule, Val. I'm going to have control of something. But I want it to be something worth ruling. I want to accomplish something worthwhile. A Pax Americana through the whole world. So that when somebody else comes after we beat the buggers, when somebody else comes here to defeat us, they'll find we've already spread over 1,000 worlds. We're at peace with ourselves and impossible to destroy. Do you understand? I want to save mankind from self-destruction. She had never seen him speak with such sincerity, with no hint of mockery, no trace of a lie in his voice. He was getting better at this. Or maybe he was actually touching on the truth. So a 12-year-old boy and his kid sister are going to save the world. How old was Alexander? I'm not going to do it overnight. I'm just going to start now. If you'll help me. I don't believe what you did to those squirrels was part of an act. I think you did it because you loved to do it. Suddenly, Peter wept into his hands. Val assumed that he was pretending, but then she wondered. It was possible, wasn't it, that he loved her, and that in this time of terrifying opportunity he was willing to weaken himself before her in order to win her love. He's manipulating me, she thought, but that doesn't mean he isn't sincere. His cheeks were wet when he took his hands away, his eyes rimmed in red. "I know," he said. "It's what I'm most afraid of. That I really am a monster. I don't want to be a killer, but I just can't help it." She had never seen him show such weakness. "You're so clever, Peter. You saved your weakness so you could use it to move me now." And yet, it did move her. Because if it were true, even partly true, then Peter was not a monster. And so she could satisfy her Peter-like love of power without fear of becoming monstrous herself. She knew that Peter was calculating even now, but she believed that under the calculations, he was telling the truth. It had been hidden layers deep, but he had probed her until he found her trust. "Val, if you don't help me, I don't know what I'll become. But if you're there, my partner in everything, you can keep me from becoming like that, like the bad ones." She nodded. "You are only pretending to share power with me," she thought. "But in fact, I have power over you, even though you don't know it." "I will. I'll help you."
As soon as Father got them both onto his citizens' access, they began testing the waters. They stayed away from the nets that required use of a real name. That wasn't hard, because real names only had to do with money. They didn't need money. They needed respect, and that they could earn. With false names on the right nets, they could be anybody. Old men, middle-aged women, anybody, as long as they were careful about the way they wrote. All that anyone would see were their words, their ideas. Every citizen started equal on the nets. They used throwaway names with their early efforts, not the identities that Peter planned to make famous and influential. Of course, they were not invited to take part in the great national and international political forums. They could only be audiences there until they were invited or elected to take part. But they signed on and watched, reading some of the essays published by the great names, witnessing the debates that played across their desks. And in the lesser conferences, where common people commented about the great debates, they began to insert their comments. At first, Peter insisted that they be deliberately inflammatory. "We can't learn how our style of writing is working unless we get responses, and if we're bland, no one will answer." They were not bland, and people answered. The responses that got posted on the public nets were vinegar. The responses that were sent as mail for Peter and Valentine to read privately were poisonous. But they did learn what attributes of their writing were seized upon as childish and immature, and they got better. When Peter was satisfied that they knew how to sound adult, he killed the old identities, and they began to prepare to attract real attention. "We have to seem completely separate. We'll write about different things at different times. We'll never refer to each other. You'll mostly work on the West Coast nets, and I'll mostly work in the South. Regional issues, too, so do your homework." They did their homework. Mother and Father worried sometimes, with Peter and Valentine constantly together, their desks tucked under their arms. But they couldn't complain. Their grades were good, and Valentine was such a good influence on Peter. She had changed his whole attitude toward everything. and Peter and Valentine sat together in the woods, in good weather and in pocket restaurants and indoor parks when it rained, and they composed their political commentaries. Peter carefully designed both characters so that neither one had all of his ideas. There were even some spare identities that they used to drop in third-party opinions. "Let both of them find a following as they can," said Peter. Once, tired of writing and rewriting until Peter was satisfied, Val despaired and said, "Write it yourself, then." "I can't," he answered. "They can't both sound alike, ever. You forget that someday we'll be famous enough that somebody will start running analyses. We'll have to come up as different people every time." So she wrote on. Her main identity on the nets was Demosthenes. Peter chose the name. He called himself Locke. They were obvious pseudonyms, but that was part of the plan. With any luck, they'll start trying to guess who we are. If we get famous enough, the government can always get access and find out who we really are. When that happens, we'll be too entrenched to suffer much loss. People might be shocked that Demosthenes and Locke are two kids, but they'll already be used to listening to us. They began composing debates for their characters. Valentine would prepare an opening statement, and Peter would invent a throwaway name to answer her. His answer would be intelligent, and the debate would be lively, lots of clever invective and good political rhetoric. Valentine had a knack for alliteration that made her phrases memorable. Then they would enter the debate into the network, separated by a reasonable amount of time, as if they were actually making them up on the spot. Sometimes a few other netters would interpose comments, but Peter and Val would usually ignore them or change their own comments only slightly to accommodate what had been said. Peter took careful note of all their most memorable phrases, and then did searches from time to find those phrases cropping up in other places. Not all of them did, but most of them were repeated here and there, and some of them even showed up in the major debates on the prestige nets. "We're being read," Peter said. "The ideas are seeping out." "The phrases, anyway. That's just a measure. Look, we're having some influence. Nobody quotes us by name yet, but they're discussing the points we raise. We're helping set the agenda. We're getting there. Should we try to get into the main debates? No, we'll wait until they ask us." They'd been doing it only 7 months when one of the West Coast nets sent Demosthenes a message, an offer for a weekly column in a pretty good news set. "I can't do a weekly column," Valentine said. "I don't even have a monthly period yet." "The two aren't related," Peter said. "They are to me. I'm still a kid." "Tell them yes. But since you prefer not to have your true identity revealed, you want them to pay you a network time, a new access code through their corporate identity. So when the government traces me, you'll just be a person who can sign on through CalNet. Father's citizens' access doesn't get involved. What I can't figure out is why they wanted Demosthenes before Locke. Talent rises to the top.